Evil. To be profoundly immoral and wicked. There are, on average, 1.3 million violent crimes in the U.S. annually, 800,000 assaults, 90,000 rapes, and 15 to 20,000 murders. Murderers are not monsters, they're men. And that's the most frightening thing about them. Alice Sebold. Megan, a licensed mental health professional, and her husband, Paul, a police officer, sit down to examine and discuss the nature, the impact, and most importantly, the origins of evil.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I am Paul Braun.
And I'm Megan Braun.
And this is The Origins of Evil, a podcast about both poor and unfortunate souls and the things that motivate their decisions, like trying to get legs so you can hook up with that sailor boy you saw.
Poor, unfortunate souls in pain, in need. This one's trying to be thinner. This one wants to get the girl. Does someone help them? Yes, indeed. They're poor, unfortunate souls. Sorry.
There you go. There's your Disney reference for this episode, everyone. Hope it was up to snuff.
That's about as G-rated as this podcast is going to get. So enjoy that.
I mean, listen. Yeah. I mean, it's not too often you get to mix together phrases like Disney and coffin birth. So I'm happy that we can put that out into the ether for everyone. So here we are. Episode 2, or as the French would say, 2. This one is going to be a bummer again, guys. That's going to be a running theme for this show. Why don't we do too many fun crimes? Why is it always...
I don't know if there's anything really fun about this genre.
You know what? I have an entire catalog of heist movies that would say otherwise.
Okay. Well, all right.
Before we get into it, a very Merry Christmas to all those out there who celebrate, and a Happy Holidays to those who don't celebrate.
And the war on Christmas rages across the country.
Listen, guys, keep fighting it. One day we'll fucking win.
And we'll figure out exactly who started it and you know, what's going on there.
Listen, all I know is that, Kurt Cameron, your fucking day's a numbered, guy. We're coming after you with your refusal to kiss anyone who isn't your wife in a movie. You strange man. You know things are fucked when the sister is the more normal one, and she's still truly bizarre.
Yeah, I wouldn't call her exactly, prime rose.
No. When you get a chance, watch Saving Christmas from Mr. Cameron. It's truly just cinematic gold. Megan, would you like to share some of your holiday festivities that you had?
Yes, I slaved over a hot stove on Christmas Eve to make dinner for our family.
Okay. That's a fucking lie. Megan has cooked exactly 4, maybe 5 times for the duration of our relationship. Christmas is the only time she cooks.
And
anything.
I made one thing. Well, actually 2. Actually 3. I made the pernil, I made a salad, and I made Christmas crack.
Do you really make a salad, or do you assemble a salad?
Like the Avengers? Assemble.
Yes, you are. You are the Samuel L. Jackson of salad production, motherfucker. But yeah, it was a great time, joyous Christmas, and we're here to just piss all over that on New Year's Eve. Just the two of us discussing a case that Megan is bringing forth, actually.
Yes, this is my week to discuss the case. And the case that I picked, I found out about maybe like a year ago, just watching one of my shows on ID Discovery, as I do. And
White women, am I right?
Just a living stereotype. I found this case just to be really heartbreaking, and I'm just really curious to see like how other people think about this case, because it's a doozy. I learned that word in another podcast that is also a true crime-based podcast, where one of the co-hosts just says, "Wow, that was a doozy," to describe horrific murders, and I feel like that's a very safe term. Oh my God, our cats, they're fighting. I just feel like that's a very safe term.
Yeah. Yeah, if your first reaction to child murder is, oh darn, it's okay. God'll be fine if you say, Jesus fucking Christ,
That was
this
awful.
child was beaten to death. That's, you know, he'll understand.
Like I was saying, I am really curious to see what other people's opinions on this case is, because I feel like it's not very cut and dry.
Yeah.
You know, I find myself leaning one way towards it, and then there's part of me that's like, well...
See, a phrase I never thought I would say, the nice thing about the Watts family murder is that it is one of those instances where it is very black and white. We know who the bad guy is there. Megan just finishing off her martini. We know who the bad guy is there. There's no bad feelings about him. No one who is a normal, healthy, functioning adult is like, aw, but Chris Watts. I'm looking at all you weird women with your crystals who are sending him love messages. Stop doing that.
Yeah, very strange. Don't do that.
This is one of those cases which honestly far outweigh the other ones, where this is in that just truly awful gray area, that murky, awful gray.
With that being said, let's get into it. Or as the French would say, let's get into it. So I don't think the French would say that. Okay.
That also really was not a good French accent.
I'm just trying to sound like Pierre Louis from The Little Mermaid.
Listen, wait, who?
Pierre Louis, the lobster.
I genuinely don't remember who that is.
The lobster, her friend, under the sea.
Okay, wow. Okay, for Sebastian? Okay, these are the wires that my wife just got crossed. Sebastian had a clearly, like, Caribbean accent. And not only that, I think you're confusing this with Finding Nemo and the character who was in, like, the dentist office. I think he was a crab or some kind of crustacean, and he was obsessed with bubbles. Remember my bubbles?
Oh, wait, yeah.
Did you seriously just conflate those two things?
I think so.
That's it. You're not going to Disney now. You're Disney timeout for another 2 years. No Epcot for you.
Oh, my God.
You want to go to the experimental prototype community of tomorrow? Not on my watch.
I have to know all the characters in The Little Mermaid.
You just can't get it that wrong.
But I do this often.
What did you call him? What name?
Pierre Louis.
Okay.
Anyway.
Now that that's done, let's please, for the love of God, get to this case.
Okay. So today's episode brings us to Greenwood, Indiana, a city just 15 minutes away from downtown Indianapolis, for those of you who know where that is.
I do not.
Know nothing about Indiana.
We're East Coast. What's the phrase? Not pieces of shit.
No, I don't think that's the phrase.
It's probably not the phrase, but we're those awful New Yorkers who are just like, no, most of the country's very quaint.
Yeah. Indiana's like a foreign concept. I couldn't point it out on a map, probably. Or maybe I could. I think it's by Ohio. I don't know.
Alienating more of our audience.
If you're from Indiana, let us know from what part and tell us something interesting about yourself living in Indiana.
Hawkins is supposed to be in Indiana.
Yes, Stranger Things. Great show.
Even though it's actually it's based on a Long Island myth. Montauk Boys, look it up. All right, get to the goddamn case.
Right.
Let's go.
It's 46 years ago to the day. On this day, New Year's Eve.
Wait a minute. You're saying this murder happened 46 years ago?
That's right.
Tonight?
December 31st, 1975.
That's the only sound effect I had planned.
18-year-old Cindy White, a live-in babysitter, lights the family Christmas tree ablaze. In a matter of minutes, Cindy would wake up outside on the lawn, being taken care of by neighbors, and the entire Roberson family would be dead. What would cause a seemingly harmless 18-year-old girl to snap and commit such a heinous act against a family who, for all intent and purpose, took care of her? Well, for that, we're going to have to go back in time and take a look at Cindy's childhood and the possible risk factors leading up to this moment. Before I begin, I would just like to take a moment to share that we will be discussing sexual abuse in this episode. So if this is triggering for you, feel free to listen to another episode or podcast altogether. Sarah Isabel White was born on June 24th, 1957.
Wait, who the fuck is Sarah Isabel White?
Here's the thing. I just need to point out that I have no idea why she goes by Cindy. I couldn't find anything in the research. And as far as I know, Cindy is not a nickname for Sarah or Isabel. Feel free to correct me if I'm wrong. And if you know why someone with the name Sarah would go by Cindy, let me know why.
Yeah. And to all those Richards out there who go by Dick, you're on thin ice too.
Cindy was one of 6 children in the White family. Cindy describes herself as a daddy's girl from a very young age. She talks about how her father, Earl, who was a mechanic, would take her out to his garage and allow her to watch him work on cars and how special that made her feel. Cindy reports that her mother was an alcoholic and was indifferent and unemotional most of the time. The attention and love she received from her father made her feel valued. Unfortunately, when Cindy was just 8 years old, her relationship with her father changed. Earl started to sexually abuse Cindy. Earl manipulated Cindy by telling her this was a special secret between daddies and daughters and that she could not share with the rest of the family. At some point, Cindy gained the confidence to disclose the abuse to her mother, who gave a truly horrifying response.
I mean, Jesus.
Yeah.
I feel like that's not an easy thing to... It's not an easy subject to broach with your mom.
Yeah, and I mean, she was still like a child when she was telling her, because in the interviews, she talks about how she when she tells her mom, she's like, Daddy's messing with me. And her mom's like, well, what do you mean? She goes, he's like, mess with me like he's playing with me. Cindy's mother tells her not to be alone with her father.
That is so much more worse than what I thought it was going to. I assumed it was going to be a, well, I don't believe you kind of thing, but she just didn't. She was just like, I guess.
Yep. And that was it.
That was it.
Never broached the subject again, and Cindy's mother never did anything to help her.
How much was her mom, drinking?
I mean, I'm not sure, but I guess enough where she was indifferent.
How many sea breezes does it take to be okay with that happening to your child? Specifically from your spouse? Jesus.
I know. I mean, alcoholics, they don't know how to cope themselves, which is why they're drinking. So for them to take on someone else's problem, it's impossible when you're drinking that much and when your focus is just numbing yourself all day. In 1974, Cindy began to lose feeling in her left leg and eventually became paralyzed. Her mother takes her to a hospital, and they're like, yeah, there's nothing we can do. There's no medical cause for this. This is psychological. So Cindy is then admitted to LaRue Carter Hospital, which has an inpatient mental health setting where Cindy is admitted and she is diagnosed with hysterical paralysis. Back in the day, hysterical paralysis was a conversion disorder. Today, it's just known as conversion disorder or functional neurological disorder. Essentially, with conversion disorders, your body goes into protection mode. So your mental health symptoms, like anxiety, like stress, like tension, they convert into physical symptoms. And a lot of experts think this is done as a way to protect the psyche of the abused individual. So essentially, Cindy's body is shutting down as a way to protect herself from the abuse of her father. And it works because she's admitted into a hospital and she is taken away from him.
So for those out there saying so she was faking it, it's that would not be a correct description of what was happening.
No, that's malingering. That's when someone fakes a physical or mental illness. No, this is very real. She very much could not move her left leg.
And this was her body just going into a self-preservation, I know if I do this, abuse will stop happening to me.
Yeah.
That is crazy.
I'm not capable of being abused if I'm in this disabled, paralyzed state. And yeah, it worked because, like I said, she was taken to hospital. She was able to escape her father. So it worked for a short time. While she's in the hospital, she's progressing, she's getting better. Both of her parents pass away.
Oh, that's a shame.
Yeah.
That's a...
And I just want to point out, Cindy, even though she's getting better and she's doing well, she never discloses the abuse to the hospital staff, nor was she ever asked by the hospital staff to disclose abuse. I don't want to put the blame on her because when you work in a mental health facility, you should be asking these questions immediately because it's very difficult to come forward with sexual abuse, especially for a young teenage girl who's only had people shut her down because of it.
At this point, I wouldn't think that anyone would blame her because, look, she came forward to the one person that's supposed to protect her and basically got told, nah, you deal with it.
Yeah.
So no wonder that she's not fucking disclosing this to anyone.
So it's the fall of 1975. Cindy is getting ready to be discharged from the hospital, but she really doesn't have anywhere to go. Her parents are dead. She doesn't have a house.
Do we know what happened with her siblings?
The siblings go, from what I have read in the research, they are taken in by her grandmother. Now, I don't know if it's that Cindy wasn't welcome there or whatnot, if there was any room. It doesn't seem like that was an option for her.
Okay.
However, miraculously, the Roberson family, which was a family that Cindy had gotten to know over the years, she worked a little paper route, and she would interact with them. She would play with their kids. They offer her a live-in babysitting position for their 4 young children, Michael 7, Dale 6, Gary 5, and Rita, a.k.a. Sissy, 4.
Oh, well, that's very fortuitous.
Yeah. So for a short while, things seemed hopeful for Cindy. She was working, she had a roof over her head, a family that cared for her, and not to mention the attention of a much older male, Charles Roberson, who was 45 years old, and Cindy is 18.
Legal, but...
Yeah. Cindy enjoyed the attention from Charles so much, she even wrote him love letters. Unfortunately, what appeared to be innocent flirting quickly turned into sexual abuse. Cindy recalls having Charles force her to watch porn and engage in sexual acts in front of other men, sometimes including a dog.
Oh, what?
Yes.
Could you, a dog was present or a dog was involved?
She was forced to have sex with a dog. I don't know if it was a family dog. She doesn't specify in the interview. I know that that's not really important.
Is that better or worse?
Yeah.
I guess the breakfast would be a little less bad if it wasn't the family dog, but Jesus.
Yeah. That starts happening. Cindy believed that Carol, his wife, knows nothing about this abuse. So she's relieved when Carol walks in on her and Charles one day. She's like, oh, thank God, the cat's out of the bag. Maybe I'll get some help. However, Carol comes in and says, what did I miss? And joins in.
What? Okay.
Yeah.
What the okay. All right. What are the... How did this happen again to her? This is literally like some movie bullshit where this is literally the same thing of her growing up is just happening again. The male figure abusing her, the female figure completely apathetic about it, although maybe even worse, maybe she's involved. I don't know yet, but...
People who suffer from abuse, they don't always grow up knowing boundaries, knowing what healthy relationships look like. And that's not their fault. It's just that these behaviors aren't modeled to them.
Yeah.
So they take any attention or interest shown in them by others as, oh, look, this person cares about me. They're paying attention to me. They're offering, me a job, a roof over my head.
But once things started to get sexual with the dad, you'd think that because of her history, that would freak her out or scare her because of the abuse.
You would think that, but once again, it's the same thing as with her dad, where it's like, this is our secret. You can't tell anyone. If you tell someone, then, people are going to get hurt. Which is, essentially, I didn't mention it earlier, but along with this is what daddies and daughters do, her dad said, if you want to continue to see your family, you got to keep this a secret. And for her, she didn't have anywhere else to go. So when she was living with the Robersons, so it's like, I guess I should just put up with this and then try to push it down and not say anything. And clearly it's my fault if it, keeps happening to me, which it's not. If you're a victim of abuse, please know that it's never your fault. Ever. In the winter of 1975, Cindy is like, okay, that's it. I'm leaving. So she packs her bag and she's getting ready to leave. And she says Charles Roberson forces her back into her bedroom and locks her in. And a couple of hours later, he returns with a kitten. And before I continue with this next part, I just want to give a warning that we're going to talk about animal abuse. So if that is something you don't want to listen to, feel free to skip ahead. But he returns to her bedroom with a kitten, and he rips the kitten's head off in front of her and says, if you try to leave again, you are going to suffer the same fate as this kitten. Yeah.
What the fuck?
Yeah. Obviously, she's scared after that, as I think any normal person would be. I would be. And she says, okay, lesson learned. However, a few days later, she's talking on the phone with her sister-in-law, who was living with their grandmother at the time. And her sister-in-law tells Cindy that there was a house fire at her grandmother's house, and that, everyone got out safe, but the whole house went up in flames, and, it's unlivable. It's done.
I guess like smoke.
Yeah.
That.
This gives Cindy an idea. Cindy thinks to herself, well, what if that happened here? What if a fire broke out and destroyed the house where we couldn't live in it anymore, and I just could leave? I couldn't stay with them because they don't even have a place to stay, so I'd be forced to, go out on my own. This is exactly what she does. On New Year's Eve, 1975, Cindy takes a piece of paper, she lights it on fire, she throws it into the Christmas tree, and she says that it goes up in flames so fast.
Yeah, we're talking about how many days after Christmas? A dry Christmas tree burns like you can't fucking believe.
Yeah, like I'm saying, it's going up really fast. She runs into Charles and Carol's bedroom, and she's like, hey, there's a fire, we gotta go. So she is helping Carol with the kids, trying to get them out of the house. So Carol, she ushers her into one of the bedrooms, and she's like, okay, open that window. I'm gonna hand you the kids, help me get them out. So Cindy, she climbs up on something, she opens the window, and apparently what happens is there's a backdraft.
Yeah, you're feeding the fire oxygen.
Yeah. She gets pushed forward and falls out of the window, and the kids get blown back.
So, yeah, this is first story, right? It's a one-story house?
Yeah.
Okay.
Next thing she knows, she wakes up on the front lawn. She's screaming. Some of her neighbors are there trying to take care of her, and multiple sources cited that Cindy tried to run back into the house at some point to rescue the family, but that the neighbors prevented her from doing that. A short while after, she's taken to the hospital, and she is treated for severe burns on her arms and singed hair. While she's at the hospital, she learns that the entire Roberson family dies in the fire, and the coroner would later rule their deaths as a combination of smoke inhalation and carbon monoxide poisoning. Immediately, an investigation is started into the fire. However, it doesn't take long for investigators to realize that the fire was set intentionally. Originally, the fire was thought to be caused by faulty Christmas lights in the tree. However, officials soon determined that the fire actually damaged the internal wiring of the house. And this was something that I learned. I didn't realize that this existed. The Christmas tree was actually fireproof.
Oh, is the synthetic one?
They don't say that, but I guess. I have never heard of a fireproof Christmas tree.
Honestly, that just sounds like some typical 70s bullshit. They probably sprayed asbestos all over it.
So police now start to look at Cindy, who is the lone survivor who escaped with a couple of burns and singed hair. And it just so happened that she was wearing flame retardant pajamas.
It's not a good look. I mean, also, like you said, everyone was killed. Most people in fires, they're typically killed via smoke inhalation and stuff like that. Carbon monoxide poisoning. Most people don't burn to death. So for her to be burned, that means that you were near the fire.
So Cindy speaks with police and she's like, I was sleeping on the couch when the fire broke out and I woke up at the smell of smoke.
Oh, so she's lying.
Yeah. It only gets worse for Cindy when, they're doing a walkthrough of the house and they find Charles Roberson's wallet. And in his wallet is nude photos of Cindy along with the love letters she had written to him.
Of all the things to survive that fire, it's always the nudes.
Yeah. And so authorities were able to gather enough evidence to arrest and charge Cindy with the fire and murders of the Roberson family. So I actually had a pretty difficult time finding what the defense was for Cindy during the trial because she does not disclose the abuse to her attorney or anyone. She doesn't talk about the abuse that she suffered at the hands of her father or at the hands of the Robersons. What I surmise she said was that she was just, sleeping on the couch and the fire broke out and she had nothing to do with it. That's what I gather from everything that I've read, but I don't know if that's true or not.
Fire nudes. God damn it. That would have been great.
Oh my God.
I really shat the bed on that one. I'm sorry, everyone. I let you down.
But the prosecution goes for the jilted lover during trial, and they are successful with it. Essentially, due to the love letters that they found and the nude photos, they painted Cindy out to be a jealous mistress, having an affair with Charles Roberson, upset that he would not leave his wife for her, and so she starts a fire with the intent of killing the entire family. And a couple of other things I'd like to mention about the trial is the use of an accelerant during the fire was also a hot topic. Both the defense...
A hot topic? Really? Really, Megan?
Damn it. Both the defense and prosecution brought in experts. Obviously, the defense expert stated that there was no accelerant used, and the prosecution stated that there was an accelerant like gasoline used, and that they could tell because of the patterns on the carpet and the walls. In an interview on the show Facing Evil with FBI profiler Candace DeLong, she asked Cindy White straight up, she's like, did you use an accelerant? And Cindy says no. She admits to starting the fire, but she states that she lit a piece of paper on fire and she threw it into the tree, and it just went up so fast, faster than she thought it would. And it spread before she could really alert the Roberson family of what was going on.
Do you ever think that at the end of an interview, Candace DeLong would look at the camera and say something to the effect of, well, guys, I guess that's the long and the short of it. And then there's a guitar so and she walks off. Kind of like
she
David Caruso.
She should start doing that.
Candy, you want to take that? It's all yours. You can have that. You're welcome.
On May 21st, 1976, she is found guilty of 1 count of arson and 6 felony first-degree murder charges, which she is serving concurrently.
Yeesh. So that's essentially 6 life sentences that she's serving concurrently.
Yes. Plus, I think it's 25 years for the arson. I believe it was 5 to 25 years, and I think they gave her
the maximum amount of everything.
Yeah.
Yikes.
Okay, so 10 years after her trial, Cindy opens up to a prison psychiatrist about her abuse. She reports that her main motivation for this was to finally get it out and maybe help someone else in the process. One question I saw a lot when researching this case was, why did Cindy fail to disclose her history of abuse during her trial? Why did she wait 10 years to talk about it? Where I can't speak for Cindy, I can speak to my education and experience in working with sexual abuse survivors. When someone is sexually abused, their self-image is damaged. Their perception of reality and what relationships should look like is changed, and with this comes feelings of guilt and shame. It can take decades for someone to feel comfortable enough to open up about their sexual abuse. Although many feel her trial would have been a good opportunity for Cindy to disclose her abuse, the guilt that she felt for her role in the abuse and probably the guilt she feels for the deaths of the Roberson family prevented her from doing so. And you could see this in interviews. She's very, very remorseful that they're dead, and has even went as far as saying, I would give my life for them to be back. And these are just some statistics I want to throw out there about children who are sexually abused. 10% of American children are abused before the age of 18. Among these children who are sexually abused, 20% experience abuse before the age of 8 years old. 73% of child targets do not disclose the abuse for a year or more, and 45% of child targets do not disclose abuse until at least 5 years have passed. So it's really not uncommon for people to keep their abuse confidential. Now, I'm just going to touch on Cindy's development and how the maladaptive patterns in her relationships influenced her reality. The first relationship we have with our parents influences our perception of what love is. This can make it difficult to identify red flags or unhealthy patterns in relationships because they feel normal to us. Cindy was emotionally neglected from an early age and never had a chance. Children of alcoholic mothers often fail to learn proper coping skills, and as a result, they are more likely to internalize their problems. This may manifest in different ways, such as becoming withdrawn, depressed, anxious, or inhibited with others. Internalizing problems affect the child's internal world and experience. Some studies show that alcoholic mothers display less closeness, supervision, and positive involvement with their children, which we saw earlier when Cindy discloses the abuse to her mother. Her father sent the message that the only way she could be loved is if she did exactly what he told her, thus leaving the impression in her young mind that being loved and cared for means keeping secrets and allowing her body to be used at the expense of others. When you love someone, you allow them to have complete control over you. And that essentially is what sexual abuse comes down to. It's never an attraction, right? Like, it's not like Charles Roberson was in love with Cindy or attracted to her. He saw a victim in her, and he saw someone that was easy to control. And that's why he did what he did. And the same goes with her father. He saw his young, love-starved daughter looking for someone to care about her. And so he abused her as well.
I mean, with the Robersons, the power dynamic was completely shifted in their favor. They were adults. They were she was basically their ward for all intents and purposes. They were the reason she had a place to live. They were constantly had her at their house. Like, what was she really going to do?
Exactly.
Be homeless? That's the alternative.
Yeah, and that sent the message to Cindy, I think, where it's like, wow, look how good these people are to me. They're, letting me stay in their house. They're giving me a job. I love their kids. This is the least I can do, which sounds insane. But when you grow up and that is all you've known, it doesn't sound so insane to you.
Yeah, insane's a relative term.
Yeah. And I would say that, the Robersons were probably sexual sadists, that they got off on torturing and abusing young, vulnerable adults.
Yeah, it's not that hard to find somebody who will consent to that kind of stuff. I don't think that was part of their puzzle for them. Like you said, I think the fact that it was against her will that was probably a part of it.
Yeah, definitely. Cindy has tried to appeal her case on several occasions so that she is eligible for parole. However, she has been denied every time. In a 1999 ruling, the Court of Appeals noted, at the time of White's conviction, inmates serving life sentences were not intended by the legislator to be included in those classes of inmates who could become eligible for parole. That means a clemency proceeding is the only alternative. Cindy is currently the longest-serving female prisoner in Indiana. She currently resides in Indiana's women's prison. She is currently the longest-serving female inmate in Indiana. She's at Indiana's women's facility, and she's been there since 1976. So she's still there.
So that's like 30 years ago.
Yeah, totally. Wait, what?
Oh, no.
Oh, God.
We're fucking old.
It's like
the 70s or
47 years ago. Ooh. Oh, no, 45 years ago.
It's too many years ago. It's okay.
Her only option to get out is clemency. She's not eligible for parole, and she's been, like, every option that she's had, or every time they've tried to, like, overturn her sentence to get her eligible for parole, it's been denied.
And there's, like, a petition or something?
Yeah, there's a petition. If you can sign it if you'd like. We'll probably put it in the show notes, the links. If you listen, if you're interested, you don't have to. I'm not like saying people should sign it, but if you are listening and you're like, I would like to sign that, we will have that option for you. It also came out after the trial that she was assessed as having I think it was the emotional intelligence of like a 12-year-old at trial, or the competency of a 12-year-old, but they charged her, I mean, as an adult, because she was 18.
Yeah, she was 18 at the time of.
Yeah.
So this is hard because you want to feel bad because obviously she spent a lot of her life as a victim, but at the end of the day, she did kill 6 people, 4 of them children.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I guess, are we going to have a conversation about how much intent matters right now? Because that seems to, like, there's, she doesn't argue that, like, she didn't do this, right?
No, she said, no, I did this. Yeah, she's been very honest about that.
All right, that's good, I guess. Okay, so she was charged with, I'm guessing, first-degree murder? They're saying
6 counts of first-degree murder and then another count of arson.
All right. So I guess what it comes down to is what was her mens rea? That's really going to be what settles this. And for those who don't know what mens rea is basically like your mental state in regards to what you did. And there are 4 different types of them. There is intentionally. So that would mean in the circumstances of murder that you planned it. It was premeditated. Your intent was to kill a specific person and you killed that person. That is intentionally. The second is knowingly. Knowingly is a little bit different. A person acts knowingly when they're aware that their conduct will result in certain consequences. In other words, a person acts knowingly if they are aware that it is practically certain that their conduct will cause a result. But it's not specified on one person. So, if you set a bomb at a restaurant that you know that someone that you hate is going to be at, and the bomb goes off and it kills that person, but it also takes out the waiter and the busboy, then you intentionally killed the person you wanted to, but you knowingly killed the busboy and the waiter because you knew what you did was dangerous and you knew that there would reasonably be those people there. So that's knowingly.
And that's the thing that's, I think, difficult about this case is, they're saying she has the mind of a 12-year-old during the trial, which I can very much see a 12-year-old being like, yeah, I could set a fire and everyone will get out because that's what happened at my grandma's house.
Yeah. Those 2 first ones, that's clearly what the prosecution was saying she was. And I think what a lot of people are arguing now is that she falls into one of the 2 following mind states out of the 4. Recklessly. A person acts recklessly if they are aware there is a substantial risk that a certain result will occur based on their actions. The risk must be substantial enough that the action represents a gross deviation from what a reasonable, law-abiding citizen would do. Now, this next one's going to sound very similar because this next one is negligence. Negligence is more or less the same as recklessness, but the key difference is that with negligence, the person has to not realize that their actions were dangerous. They can't have the knowledge that what they were doing could hurt someone. Now, I could see that being applicable in this case if we're talking about her mental capacity being deficient.
Yeah. Again, one of the biggest issues, too, is that the defense just didn't have the full story. So
they were fighting with a hand tied behind their back.
Yeah, like the prosecution was, they pretty much had their story from the beginning, right? Like young girl having an affair with the husband of the family she works for. Wife finds out, husband says he's going to stay with her, and she gets pissed and sets the house aflame, not knowing that she suffered from this horrific abuse at the hands of both of them. And also another thing that the prosecution and the defense, they argued at the trial, was whether or not an accelerant like gasoline was used to start the fire.
Because I think an accelerant would definitely be a more specific mark of an intentional act versus one of the other ones that we talked about.
So they both brought in experts, and of course the prosecution said, yes, this was used, and I think the prosecution brought in an expert that said gasoline was used because of the way there was like patterns on the walls and the carpet that were apparently consistent with gasoline. And the defense brought in an expert that says, no, gasoline wasn't used. There was no accelerant. The tree literally lit up in flames. You light a piece of paper, you throw it in a tree. That's it. That the fire is going to spread without the use of an accelerant. During the episode of Facing Evil, Candace DeLong asks Cindy, she's like, be honest with us. Did you use an accelerant? And she says no. To be honest, I believe her because, I don't know if she had the knowledge or the common sense to just, like, where would she get gasoline from? I don't know.
So, I have this nagging thing in the back of my head where it's like, she killed 4 children, though.
Yeah.
And yes, very sad. We could argue whether or not there was intent there, but like, how do we reconcile that? Because if we want to like play this game, on paper, she's worse than Chris Watts, if we're just talking straight numbers.
Yeah.
But watching her and reading up on her, don't feel like she is, frankly, evil like he is.
Yeah.
I think maybe she made some very, 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 very poor choices that led to the deaths of a lot of people and should still be held responsible.
And this is, I think a part of a bigger conversation that we have to have as a society where it's like you have someone suffering at the hands of abuse and they don't have any tools. They don't have anyone that they can turn to. There was no check done with like the Roberson family. The one psych admission she had, they didn't do a thorough intake. So it's kind of like, well, what do you expect to happen? You have all these terrible things building up, and now a family is dead. And I'm not saying, I condone what she did because I don't. I think that the Robersons, frankly, should have faced justice. I don't think these poor kids died and they had nothing to do with it.
She doesn't justify what she did.
Yeah. But this is what happens when the tools aren't available to the people that need them the most.
So, like, we've seen video of Chris Watts and we've seen video of her talking about it. Do you get the vibe that she is genuine with her remorse, or is it an act?
I definitely get the vibe that she's genuinely remorseful. She has said that she would give anything to have them all back. And I believe that. And we watch a lot of documentaries, right, where the person, or we listen to podcasts where people are like, oh, I didn't mean to kill them. I meant to scare them. And it's like, well, you blindfolded them and shot them with a rifle. Like, what? At what point were you going to draw the line between scaring them and killing them? Where it's like, okay, well, you're obviously full of shit. With her, I genuinely believe that she thought she could burn the house down where they could all get out and she could just escape.
So I guess the big question is now, let's say, for argument's sake, that she was convicted incorrectly, that the charges should have been different. They shouldn't have been murder 1, but maybe something a little lesser, because like she definitely needs to still be in jail.
Yeah.
So there needs to be a sentence that has to go with that. You don't just get to, it was an accident. So the way that it is written out in the penal code for Indiana is murder is when a person knowingly or intentionally kills another human being. That's in the first. And then in the second, we have kills another human being while committing one of the following acts: arson, burglary, child molestation. Point being, it's a long list. The first thing is arson. Now, it goes without saying that arson in this context would be a lesser crime when you stack it up against murder 1. So the way their sentencing works is that murder, you're looking between 45 to 65 years per count. Consecutive means that you have to serve the duration of one sentence before the second one can even start. It functionally makes it impossible to get paroled. Ever. A concurrent sentence means, like, if you're charged with 6 concurrent murder charges, that means you serve all 6 of them at the same time. So at the end of the 45 years, which is the minimum, you could reasonably be eligible for parole. Because she was sentenced to 6 concurrent life sentences, altering that from murder, which as we already stated, is like 45 years at the minimum, to arson, which is closer to 20 years at minimum. It sets the goalpost for where she could hit parole to a point that she would actually still reasonably be alive. It's a difference of like 25 years at least. Now, do you think that she is the kind of person that would reoffend?
No, I don't.
But you also said that Chris Watts wasn't the kind of person who would necessarily reoffend.
Yeah, I don't think he would either. I think that both of their motives were very personal, but I think that Cindy White was a very desperate and vulnerable person trying to escape an abusive situation. And Chris Watts wanted a new life and wanted to make things as easy as possible for him and thought he could get away with murdering his wife and kids somehow.
That is a distinction. That is a very specific distinction when you put it like that.
I also think, which one of them would contribute or could contribute to society. I think Cindy White is aware that she has mental health issues and, emotional disturbances, and that she would be someone who would want to work on these things. I think that she's someone that was looking for help and was kind of backed into a corner where she literally felt she had no other choice but to do this. Chris Watts doesn't have the insight. He doesn't think he needs help at all. Today he says that, I found God and, I could help people in my situation. He just wants to get out. He doesn't want to do anything in society. He wants to, and that would be ultimately giving him what he wanted, right?
Yeah.
Like a life free of his wife and kids.
Yeah, I don't get the sense that
living his life.
That he carries much of a burden of what he did, whereas it's kind of all over Cindy's face.
It's I think it's clear.
Like she seems like she just languishes in what she did.
Yeah.
So if you had to give some kind of a diagnosis or something, or just some kind of mental health insight into her mind state at the time of the murders, what do you think was going through her head?
I don't really know what her diagnosis would be, but she was a traumatized individual. She had suffered from abuse since she was 8 years old by multiple people. Sexual abuse by her father, emotional abuse by her mother, due to her mother's neglect, and more sexual abuse by the Robersons. She was just a traumatized girl that didn't know another way out. She tried to escape. That failed. Her life was threatened. And she thought, well, what other option do I have? I know people are probably like, call the police. And it's like, well, what power does she have?
I mean, once
over
again,
these
like
people?
You bring it back to the last time she told one of the biggest authority figures in her life what was happening, and it did not go anywhere. It didn't end well for her. I still think she should have called the police, obviously, but you kind of need to put yourself in their shoes and be like, well, it's no wonder that she was afraid to report it.
Yeah, and I mean, when I think about it, she's 18 years old. Her pulling the abuse card.
I'm sure that would have worked great in the 70s.
Yeah.
I'm sure everyone would have believed her.
Yeah, that's like the other thing too. It's like I feel like people live in this dream world where we think like, oh, we always believe victims. And it's like, no, that's not the case. Because we find ourselves asking questions like, oh, well, what are they wearing? Why didn't they just tell someone? Why were they alone with them?
She was asking for it.
Yeah, like if she did any of these things differently, it would have stopped the abuse. And clearly that's just not the case. I don't know anything about the Indiana's women prison, but I think something that could have helped her greatly was if she went to like what are they, like mental prisons or
psych wards?
Yes.
Or psychiatric hospital?
Yeah.
I mean, that seems like it might be a better
Just because
fit.
she has suffered from so much abuse, she needs a lot of treatment and counseling.
Yeah. But one of the problems with this thing and why it's so gray is, you almost want to be able to point to the machine and be like, yeah, see, it's the government's fault or it's the police's fault. But like everyone was operating under the information that they had at the time.
Right.
So her getting sent to a prison was appropriate given the information that they had.
Yeah.
I don't like this. I like it when things are black and white, Megan. I don't like this. Makes me uncomfortable.
I know. Watching her in interviews it's just really sad. And I mean, there wasn't really too much. I feel like I kept reading like the same articles over and over, but she does another YouTube interview with celebrated British journalist Sir Trevor McDonald.
He's not related to Harry McDaniels, right?
No.
The fictitious Tom Cruise vehicle of the late 90s.
No.
Let's see how many times we can reference this fake movie. You can't handle the money. You know that line.
Essentially, he's talking with her, and this was from, I think, like 2019, and she's pretty much like accepted her fate. She's like, yep, I'm in prison. I'm not getting out. I wish I could get out. I'd love to go to the zoo. She's like,
she was 18 when she got locked up. How much of life did she really get to experience?
Her sister and her nieces visit her often, and her nieces give her like piggy bank money. And they're like, is this enough money to get you out? And it's really sad. But she says she's become like a prison mom for like all like young prisoners that have a hard time adjusting to prison life. She takes them in, and she, kind of like takes them under her wing and helps her out. And she became a medic. She was like a nurse on like the medical unit. And she did that for many years before she suffered from 2 strokes herself and ended up in a wheelchair. And now she just knits. She like knits scarves for like the prisoners. It's just like, it's so sad, because I just think of, what other injustices are going on out there in the world that, what other Cindy Whites are out there.
Yeah. And it's hard, like, to look at this from a law enforcement perspective. There's very little to criticize, just because when it comes down to it, they operated with the knowledge that they had. And that's to an extent that's on her, that she couldn't feel comfortable telling people what happened. The only things I could question really are like, you say that she got injured in the fire. If she's intentionally starting a fire, like how is she getting hurt? If she knows that she's starting it, like, you'd think she would just run right out and that would be the end of it or something like that. That's literally the only thing to Monday morning quarterback a little bit.
Well, that was the first thing that kind of got police attention. You know what I mean? There's also so much police could do in a situation like this. I mean, she was like hospitalized. She was a lone survivor. So that was a red flag to them already.
Yeah.
They're like, there usually aren't survivors in fires like this. How did the whole family die with the exception of one person? Like, how did she get out and they all die? Mm-hmm. And how did she escape with like burns and like they're dead? Yeah, I mean, that's the case of Cindy White. Very sad, very tragic. Again, mental health advocacy is very important. If you know anyone that's being abused, please call one of the hotlines that we have listed in the show notes. If you yourself are being abused, please find someone to confide in, whether it's a friend, family member, a counselor. Please get help if you are in an abusive situation. It's not your fault, but there are resources for you to get the help that you need, and they're in our show notes. I would be very interested to hear about what some of our listeners think about this case. Again, I would urge you to watch, if you have access to it, Facing Evil with Candace DeLong. It's on ID Discovery or Discovery Plus. I think the episode's from like 2015. But it's just a very interesting episode to hear Cindy tell her side of the story and hear her, remorse and what she feels led up to this moment. It's just a very tragic case. And like you're saying, I do agree, it's not black or white. Like, of course, being in the position I am as a mental health counselor, I'm like, yeah, I think that she should, I think time served. And I think she should be able to get the chance to live in society, to get help that she needs. She clearly did this as a last resort, as a desperate person trying to escape a horrible situation. But at the same time, 4 kids are dead. Yeah. And I don't know what more justice can be served for them than having the person who murdered them be put into prison. But I also don't know if there's anything that could ever really be done. It's like, well, how much, like, what's enough? I don't know if there's something that ever is enough. Yeah. Even for, like, family members of people who have been murdered, if their convicted murderer gets the death penalty, is like, well, is that even enough? Does that take away the pain? Does that make it hurt less? I don't know.
See, the thing that kills me about this is, like, someone like Chris Watts gets locked up, and even with the benefit of hindsight, everyone's like, good, that's awesome. Crisp high fives all around. everyone's happy about that because he's an evil piece of shit. This is one of those, it's like, you deserve to be locked up. You do. Because even though it can be argued whether or not this was done intentionally or recklessly or neglectfully,
Someone has to pay.
An accident that kills someone, there still needs to be a price paid. There just does.
So, Paul, being in law enforcement, what are your closing thoughts or final thoughts on this case? Go.
You know, as I said before, I think ultimately the police and the prosecution worked with what they had in terms of knowledge on this case. Because they were not given the whole picture, it seems as though maybe an appropriate verdict wasn't reached, maybe appropriate charges were not given. But now we do have all that information, and hopefully we can make the appropriate adjustments that need to be made. So this is just a really unfortunate case. It's just a bummer because a price needs to be paid, but just no one feels good about this one. What about you as a licensed mental health counselor? What are your closing thoughts on this absolute romp of a case?
It's very tough. I wish that she could be released. I do.
And at this point, she's served, what, 40-something years?
46 years, yeah.
Okay.
She's been there. I think that someone like her who has suffered so much and, like I keep saying, was never really given the proper tools to cope or, never had any supports, should be given that. And I think that she should be released. I think she's another victim in this crime. I do.
The seventh one, maybe?
Yeah.
Now, when you say release...
I don't...
You're struggling about calling the parents victims, aren't you?
Yeah. I know that technically they are, right? And I know technically they deserve to have their day in court for abuse charges or whatever they were doing with Sarah.
I think that's a very natural reaction to hear that a predator gets killed and maybe not feel 100% bad about it.
Yeah.
That's, I think that's just kind of human nature.
But I think, even though she was 18, I think she was still very childlike.
Yeah, her mental competency was definitely, I feel, should have been more in question than it was.
Yeah.
Well, Megan, I can't think of a more appropriate way to ring out the end of 2021 than this just absolute Debbie Downer of a case.
This was a good one.
Thank you. Thank you for this. Our next episode is going to be about feline AIDS.
Oh, interesting. I love feline AIDS. I was hoping it would be about general type 2 diabetes.
It's pronounced diabetes.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
Don't be insensitive or I'll dig up Wilfred Brimley's corpse.
So my sources are an episode of Facing Evil with Candace DeLong on ID Discovery, an article from Indie Star, Justia.com, and that's it. This has been The Origins of Evil. I'm Megan Braun.
And I'm Paul Braun.
And remember, never go to a second location. Happy New Year.
The Origins of Evil.